InsyaAllah. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. We are very blessed today. I think this is a long awaited session after a break from the weekend. Before we begin anything, so maybe in order to get the barakah from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, we can begin with Al-Fatihah. Okay, Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, we are all here to continue the series of the webinar series for the ERTL and assessment webinar series by CPD. So we are very blessed today. Alhamdulillah, we have Prof. Noor and I have been tasked to host this. Who's also the director of CPD, to take through with us on the topic understanding the use of traditional and alternative assessments on issues of reliability, validity, and fairness. Okay, I think I do not need to spend time to introduce Prof. Noor. Everybody knows her. She's been everywhere for training. So I pass the mic to Prof.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Mira, for setting this up, and thank you, my Prof. Dean, for agreeing to moderate this. She's an excellent moderator. If there are any questions I can answer, I'll just pass it to her, inshallah. Okay. Actually, you know, for this session, I find that I watch a lot of webinars on assessment, and I find that people actually talk about how to do alternative assessments. There are lots of criticisms about traditional methods of assessment, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding or misinterpretation about certain things. And in many cases, issues related to validity, reliability, and fairness have not been addressed as adequately as they should have, I think. So this particular session is, I hope that I shall be able to do that to some extent. Okay. Can I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I shall ask Dr. Mira if I can share my screen.
Yes, Prof. You can share now.
Thank you. How do I share my screen? Oh, okay. So I just, oh, okay. So where's my screen? This one, is it? Okay. All right. Sorry, this is my first time doing this. Okay. All right. So can everyone see the screen?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, yes. Thank you very much. All right. So the title of the presentation is oh, okay. I forgot to change the title. This was an earlier title. But the content is the same. So before I start, as I mentioned just now, there have been many online sessions that talk about alternative assessment, and lecturers are encouraged to go for alternative assessment to replace the typical mid-semester and end-of-semester examination. There are worries about how to transfer, repackage our usual traditional assessment into an alternative assessment. But I think, you know, the question is, so that we don't jump onto the wrong wagon, is about not only how, but also whether the choice of assessment is appropriate or not. We are also concerned about grading, whether to use pass-fail dichotomy for grades instead of the A minus, B plus, and so on. And then, of course, the issues related to reliability, validity, and fairness. Okay. So this session is for us to consider how to make sure that our assessments are valid and can give us reliable results. So that the important thing is that so that we don't misclassify students. Misclassify means that students who deserve to pass will pass, students who deserve to get A will get an A, and students who don't deserve to get an A will not get an A. So these are very important issues. And this can only be done if our assessments are reliable and valid, okay, and also fair. So this is the purpose of the presentation. So these are the things that I will cover. I will try to clarify traditional and alternative assessment tasks. Okay. I'm going to take you to look at whether it's not whether it's traditional or alternative, but to look at assessment tasks in a different way. Okay, and how to have valid assessment, how to make it reliable, and how to maintain fairness, as I mentioned before. Now, I wrote it all down because I get nervous, and my PhD supervisor always tell me, for the first few slides, write everything down and read off the screen. So I'm taking his advice now. I feel a little better now. So inshallah, I hope the session will continue quite smoothly. Okay. Now, when we do assessment, the first thing that we have to remember is that what kind of decisions that we are going to make based on that assessment. Okay. Is it going to be a placement into support language courses or some other learning? Is it selection for university, for scholarship? Is it promotion for higher learning, for job? Is it to certify for licensing, like say for professional practice, clinical practice, accounting, law, remediation, competency? So the first thing we have to remember when we want to set out to do assessment is that what are the decisions that we want to make based on that assessment? What is it for? Okay. Now, after that, now we have heard about this so many times: assessment of learning, assessment for learning, assessment as learning. And I think this is something that we are all familiar with, but just to keep at the back of our minds. Now, traditional versus alternative assessment. Many people have, what do you call that, define traditional assessment as a paper and pencil test, okay? But actually, traditional assessment does not only is limited to paper and pencil or paper and pen, because oral tests have been around for years, for ages, and is also sometimes classified as a traditional assessment. So this is why I'm proposing a different way of looking at assessment. Okay. Now, in the past, we have authentic assessment. So authentic assessment through what do you call that? Not internship. What do you call that? What is the word? Apprenticeship. Okay. Then it evolves into standardized or what we call traditional assessment, and now we are coming back almost full circle to alternative assessment. Okay, so maybe a little bit of history. How did this traditional assessment came about? Why do people go for standardized testing? Why pencil and paper? Actually, it comes together with a number of things. One is the behavioral approach. The second is the what do you call that? Focus on mental testing. And then also there are people who feel that, you know, that the current test at that time in the early 1900s is that those tests are very subjective. It can only cater for a small number of people because it's very labor intensive. So this person by the name of Frederick Kelly, he proposed that to have a more objective test, to take subjectivity out of testing. So this is what we are facing with alternative assessment, and to be administered at scale. That means large scale standardized testing. So at the same time, there were movement on how to check for reliability of tests, of scores and things like that. So this is a little bit of history on these traditional assessment methods. So traditional assessment methods are also what we call conventional methods of assessment. They are standardized. Okay, one important thing is that they are standardized, and usually they take the written form, but not necessarily, because oral test is also considered as traditional assessment. But we still have it. Part of our alternative assessment is that we do have oral presentations and we evaluate students' oral performance. It's commonly used to assess achievement of competency, for example, in final examination quizzes. It uses what we call selected response format, which is option A, B, C, D, or true, false, or matching. But it also uses constructed response, which is where students have to put in the answer, like fill in the blanks, or short answer questions, or long essay questions. And the scoring, therefore, can be objective for the selected response or subjective in terms of the constructed response. So if you have selected response, what's good is that it's easily administered and is quick for scoring. Okay, so this is a big advantage when you have a large number of students and when you want to get your results out very quickly. Okay? So traditional assessment also tend to focus on discrete elements. That means certain element, each question targets certain element. For example, if it's a test of grammar, we'll ask one question about tenses and other questions about prepositions and things like that, you know. But traditional assessment can also be integrative. It means that it integrates a number of skills or knowledge in order to perform that particular task. So the typical item formats, as you can see, the one that we usually use is multiple choice questions, true, false, and so on. So I put here an example of standardized tests, well-recognized standardized tests that use traditional assessment methods, like the GCE, like the PLAB, you know, the TOEFL. So all these actually, they are professional examinations, some of them, and they actually use traditional assessment methods. So the thing is that we need to know why. Why is it appropriate for them? Why have they chosen this particular assessment method? Okay, so there is a common misconception, or there is a claim that traditional assessments are actually limited because they only test low order thinking skills. But if you look at this is in medicine, or maybe I'm not sure about pharmacy, but in dentistry I do know that they have what we call either a one correct answer or a one best answer. One correct answer means the other options are wrong, only the right answer is correct. But one best answer is that all answers are probable, but there is one answer that is the best among all. Okay, so in this kind of questions, is the multiple choice format. Okay, so considered traditional, but it requires some analysis of the scenario, application of knowledge. And this particular example, on the other hand, requires the candidate to give actually the reason for the correct answer, or maybe you can ask them to give reasons for the incorrect answer. Okay, so it requires some form of reasoning. So all these things are not lower order thinking skills, they are actually higher order thinking skills. So I think a good way to actually look at whether, you know, a test, instead of saying traditional or alternative, I put it on two continuum. One is whether it is discrete point, that means you're testing one element at a time. Let's say for grammar, you're looking at tenses, you're looking at prepositions and so on. Or is it integrative? It means combination of skills. Okay, combination of skills. So when it's integrative, it's actually to some extent performance-based, and alternative assessment is also performance-based. Okay, so this is on one continuum. We'll see the next continuum. Now the issue with the traditional assessment is that it's because of this emergency remote teaching and learning. It's not so much about the lack of validity of this type of assessment method. Okay, it's more about test administration, how to maintain confidentiality, test security, integrity of responses. But it is true that most traditional assessment does not mirror real life tasks, which is actually a very strong advantage of alternative assessment. Okay, now what are the characteristics of alternative or authentic assessment? Now, alternative and authentic. Alternative means, as Prof. Ainul mentioned the other day, an alternative to the traditional methods. Authentic means it is real life. Okay, it's a real life. So for alternative assessment, students must perform tasks. It is real life. So therefore, they are direct tests, meaningful application of skills and knowledge. Now, if it involves real life context, let's say authentic assessment, it would be things like internship or driving tests. Okay. So some examples of alternative assessment are OSCE, project-based PBL, portfolio, and so on. Now, so the other continuum that we want to look at is the continuum of whether from unauthentic or inauthentic, indirect tests to direct or authentic tests. A test is said to be indirect when it tries to infer a particular ability using some elements of knowledge. For example, let's say the ability to communicate using language. Now, written communication or oral communication. But instead of asking students to write an opinion letter, for example, or asking students to express their opinion through oral communication, we try to infer their ability based on some questions on grammar. So therefore, this is an indirect test of English language communication, and it is based on some discrete elements of the language. Okay. Now, direct tests, they deal with real life. Okay, they deal with real life. Authentic means real life tasks in real world context. Okay, so the context must be there. The real world context must be there. There are some tasks that are performance-based. Let's say I ask my students to write an essay. Now, this is an integrative kind of test. It integrates different type of skills, knowledge, and different cognitive demands, but it is not. It lacks the real world context. Therefore, it's not considered as an authentic assessment, but can be considered as an alternative assessment. So if you see here, we have on one side, on the top quadrant, that's where it is integrative and it is authentic. So OSCE case study portfolio, they are integrative, they are authentic to some extent. They are real life tasks, but they are not real world tasks. Okay. Now, but clinical training, let's say in dentistry, where you treat patients for year 3, year 4, year 5, that can be considered as an authentic assessment. Okay, because it involves real life tasks in a real life context. Okay. So characteristics of alternative assessment, I'll just try and get through some of these things first before I open for questions. Now, characteristics of alternative assessment is that it is real world. So it can be authentic, is actually a direct test. So because of that, the performance that the students produce can be a product or a process. Okay. And it integrates multiple skills and knowledge. So therefore, it is open-ended, no fixed response. It must allow for creativity, but you need to have very clear rubrics, okay? Clear instructions and clear rubrics so that your test is valid. Now, it can be summative and it can be formative, and it's flexible. You can have it as individual assessment or group, all right? and it can be integrated as part of the teaching and learning process. I think this is one of the thing that is very important in alternative assessment, the integration into the teaching and learning process. So examples of alternative assessment, you have real life tasks when you are asked to design certain thing, you're asked to write a report for lab, or you do a, what do you call this? I forgot. And then treatment. So this is a real life context. So you can see it as being on a continuum, okay? And any of this are considered as alternative assessment, okay? Moving from real life, which is alternative, to real life context. Now, can the same task be classified as both traditional and authentic assessment? Now, in my view, that it can. Because let's say dictation. Dictation can be used as a language practice where you practice a discrete elements of the language, for example, spelling. Or it can be integrative, where it's still an indirect test where you get the students to practice a number of skills. It can be an authentic task. If you are interviewing, you're a secretary, you're looking for a job as a secretary, you go for a job interview and you are asked to take a dictation. Okay, so it can be. All right, so depend on the context, on the purpose, on the focus of the assessment, and also skills tested and the feedback that you would give. All right. Okay. Can an alternative assessment focus on specific skills? Okay. Now, this is a very interesting example of a test that is done by one hospital in Japan. This test is actually an aptitude test. It's a test to help selection of surgery specialist training. So they give an origami test, use instruments that they would encounter in an actual operating theater, okay, to some extent. Light is limited to, not very well lighted, and they have to focus and show their hand skills. So this is an alternative assessment. It is performance-based. To some extent, it is also discrete because it only looks at one aspect of what they're going to do as a surgery specialist. Okay, and it does not test all aspects of knowledge that would make them successful surgeon. So it simulates real life tasks to some extent. Now, if we put it on this continuum, if we try to put it on this continuum, you find that it is not authentic in the sense that it's not in the real operation theater. It's a direct test to some extent. It focuses on certain skill, but not all skills that would require you to be successful in going through training to be a surgeon. Okay. All right. So I think I stop here now for questions if you have.
Yes. Thank you, Noli. So any question so far? Or perhaps any comments? But Prof. Noli, if I can just read through the chat, rather than question, I think a lot of people are actually asking for your slides.
Oh, okay. You can have my slides. Okay. I will email it later, inshallah. Actually, for the slides, there are some notes at the bottom. So I'm going to give you the PowerPoint slides so that you can actually read those notes. You can benefit from those notes. So shall I continue, Prof. Ainul?
Yeah, please. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So designing assessment tasks. This one I took from Bachman and Palmer. There are 5 things that we have to consider. Number 1 is the practicality of that task, whether you can administer it in practical terms, authenticity, reliability, validity, and the washback. That means what is the influence or the effect of the test on teaching and learning. Okay, so these are 5 things. So for the test that I mentioned earlier, the origami test, It's practical because it's only about 15 minutes. Okay, it's not going to be a 1 hour long surgery. So it's 15 minutes, and it's practical, okay, to be administered. It doesn't test everything, but these are some of the things that I think people have observed, that if you want to be good surgeons, one of the things that you need to have is very good hand skills. Even for dentistry, now they are going for wire bending. Okay, so because they find that some students, they are very good, they have very good achievement, but they have poor hand skills and they cannot carve a nice crown. A nice filling, for example. Okay. So the next thing that we talk about practicality, we talk about authenticity, and let's talk about reliability. Now, reliability has different aspects. Okay, reliability essentially means that the consistency of your measurement. How consistent is your measurement? I'm 5'4". I don't remember in centimeters because I'm old school. So I today I'm 5'4", 5'4" Tomorrow I should be 5'4" also. Maybe as I grow older, I'll become a bit shorter because of osteoporosis. But by right, my height should not change very much in the next, I think maybe next 5 to 10 years. So reliability. So in this example, if a student scored 83% on a test, if you give him a different but similar test, parallel or equivalent. Equivalent means it's the same domain, same skill, same knowledge, it's just that the questions are a little different, that's all. Will the student get the score of 83% again? And the second one is that if Ahmad is the best scoring student, Hani comes next, Ali scores slightly low, and so on, would Ahmad get first again? So this is a norm reference kind of information. Okay, so this is about ranking, about ordering. Will you get the same ordering or not? And the other thing is that if Ahmad in one test, Ahmad passes, if he gets a parallel test, would he pass again? So this is an issue related to misclassification, stability of the results of the assessment. People in the sciences are familiar with false negatives and false positives. So these are things that we have to be aware of when we talk about reliability. So reliability, if you have reliability, then people will trust your assessment instrument. Okay. Now, one way to achieve reliability is to have a sufficiently large number of items or questions. You need to have adequate number, because as Prof. Ainul, I remembered this, she said this long time ago, reliability is the function of test length. Okay, so the longer the test, the higher the precision, therefore the more reliable is your assessment. Okay, so you need to make sure that you have sufficient number of questions, sufficient number of items. Now, in the final examination, we ask quite a bit of questions and we use quite a number of formats because we want to try to be fair to all students, because some formats are good for some students, some formats are good for other students, and some formats allow us to test certain things, while others do not lend themselves so easily. Okay, so we have a very broad coverage, and then for certain disciplines, that broad coverage of content is very important. Okay, and we also have to demonstrate that it is a reliable measure. Now, for dentistry, they have this professional examination, and they must show that it is a reliable examination, because then they're going to practice as dentists. So we have to protect the public. All right. So validity is the extent to which it is measuring what it is supposed to measure. Now, if I want to measure anxiety, I must make sure that my questions are about anxiety and not about depression. Okay. So we need to really understand what is it that we want to measure in terms of the domain knowledge. What are things that need to be measured and how do I want to measure them? So it is the confidence that people have in your assessment, okay? That the assessment is valid for the task that it is doing. So the validity asks the question, what is the degree to which evidence supports the inferences made from the test results? Now let's say the content domain has 12 topics, but in your assessment, the whole of your assessment, you only focus on 5. It means that you do not cover the whole content knowledge, okay, the whole content domain. So it means that you can only infer students' ability to those that you have included in your assessment. So this is why we need to make sure that our assessment match our LO, definitely, and also it assess the whole content domain that we are supposed to assess. Okay, so content validity is very important. Sometimes there are other aspects of validity that's difficult to demonstrate, but at least for us, we need to make sure that we can achieve this. Okay, so it's about the test must be representative of the whole testable domain, must be related to the outcomes that we expect. So validity, this can be, when you go for vetting, your colleagues will check for content validity. But for construct validity, the theory base only you know. All right. So or your colleagues who are also teaching the same subject matter. Predictive concurrent validity, usually this is done for high stake testing, like IELTS or TOEFL or SAT. Okay, not for our classroom. This is a very, very interesting, very good figure, how to show all those elements of practicality, reliability, validity, washback, and authenticity. I've adapted it from Dr. Frank Tuzzi. Okay, so you find that practicality and reliability can range from low to high. Washback and authenticity also from low to high, and validity also. Okay. Now, if you have a large-scale standardized test like the Malaysian SPM and things like that, it is very practical. It's also highly reliable because they actually do a pilot testing 3 years before they use the exam questions. Okay, but it may not represent the student's actual ability. Okay, because it's a pen and paper test, and that's it. So on the other extreme is the portfolio, journals, and conferences. So this one is very authentic. It's a direct form of testing, but sometimes it's not practical if you have 150 students in your class that you're teaching 150 students. It may have a problem of reliability when you have 3 people teaching the same course and you have different severity level or you have different perception about what a good portfolio should be. Okay, so in class, short answer, essay questions, these are somewhere in the middle. So it doesn't mean that portfolios, conferences, journal, articles cannot be reliable. It's just that you need to pay attention to certain things so that you can make it highly reliable. Okay, this is supposed to be the pit stop one. Any questions?
Question? Shall we open to
Yes,
participants
please.
to have any question or any comment?
Maybe I can pass one question from YouTube viewers.
Okay, Dr. Mira.
So there's one question on if we don't link the question to the real world, so does it mean we cannot perform alternative assessment?
Actually, alternative assessment, no, it doesn't mean that. Alternative assessment usually relates to real life task. Real life task means, let's say, architecture students. One of the things that they have to do in real life would be to draw some draw some or make some model of some building. So this is a real life task, but they're not engaged in an architect firm, you know, to do something which is real life, which is a real world context. Which is real world context. Just like internship, it is real life tasks that they have to perform, and in a real world context. So alternative assessment is, number one, it is task-based. It's task-based, okay? It's performance-based. So an oral presentation can be classified as an alternative assessment. Problem-based learning is a form of alternative assessment, because it gets students to solve problems that is, you know, some real life problems, but it lacks the real world context. It's real life things that we have to do when we graduate or when we work and things like that, but it doesn't have that real world context as internship has. Okay, so you find that, you know, people are still having essay writing. You know, they ask students to do critical evaluation, for example. You ask students to write a chapter for a book, you know. So it's a real life task. So that chapter may not be published, but it is a real life task. So it is an alternative assessment. Sorry.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So that's the only question from the YouTube viewer.
Oh, okay.
I
All
think
right.
there was one question as well, Prof. I know in the chat room. It's regarding someone from KOE, I think. Maybe if anybody would like to ask question directly, you can unmute the microphone, because I have allowed.
Yes, sister. Assalamu alaikum. Actually, sister, actually, when we are having a student spread all over the country, and we want to have online examination, that means a single question paper will not work. You should have a 40 question paper for 40 students, and it should be totally different. And KOE actually insisting that you should vet the question paper. So please tell me, because assessment is a major issue. How to assess that, you know?
You mentioned just now, just to recap your question, that you are expected to... What I'm saying
is, suppose I have got 60 students in my class, and for the online final examination, I should set 60 question paper for 60 students. Once the question paper will not work, because they are at their home, and, you know, it should not be the same question paper.
Yeah, actually, that would be ideal. The trouble is that it's the comparability of the questions, you know, because if you change the question a little bit, or you ask the question using a different format, the difficulty level of the question will change.
Yes.
So what happens is that you are making one set of tests for one student slightly easier or more difficult than the other students. There is a methodology how to deal with this. So what can be done is that actually for you, you know, we had that one session on the open book examination. You can have similar questions, but you require you formulate the questions in such a way that they have to give examples of their own, they have to give opinions of their own, so that they will have individualized responses. You know, individualized responses, unique responses, which they cannot copy. And if you require them to integrate certain elements or something like that, what will happen is that they don't have time to ask their friends or to copy, because they cannot copy, because an opinion question cannot have, you know, very similar, because different students are writing it, so the answers should be quite different. But the trouble is that if your course is testing C1 and C2, like the first year and second year courses, they're largely C2, understanding. So maybe what you can do is that you ask them to draw a mind map or something that would result in a unique response, okay, or unique example. One of the things that I know in medicine, what they do is that there are some questions that always come up every year. And these questions are considered core questions that they must get those answers right, because it is something that practicing doctors should know. So it's common knowledge that those questions will come out, those things will be assessed. Okay, so I don't know to what extent you can use that principle for your students, but definitely setting 60 questions for your 60 students, it's way too much. But if you need help to how to get around it, I can assist you using a modern test theory, which I will talk about a bit later, how to link. Okay, how to link different set of questions so that it is as if it's one single paper in getting the scores of the student. So those questions are different. Most of the questions are different. Maybe 10% of the questions are similar, but one test is linked to the other test, so that in the end, all these tests will be analyzed together so that it has one single frame of reference. But this requires some planning and also some statistical knowledge, but it can be done, not a problem.
Okay.
But don't write 60 sets of questions.
No, it's actually that the question paper to be vetted by the QE, that is another problem.
I don't know whether QE can vet all those 60 questions. How many sets? How many sets? 60 sets. How many questions per set?
Normally 5 questions.
5 questions. These are
final exam, 5 questions.
Allah.
Sister, if suppose they are at one center, then it is very easy to do it. If suppose they are sitting in one room, then online we can do it. It's absolutely no issue.
Yes.
Main issue is these students are there at home. That is the main issue.
Yes. The thing is that, you know, one of the strategy for online assessment is that it is timed. You give and you set the time, and then you randomize the question. Because and when you randomize the question, you only give single attempt. That means once they answer the question and submit the question, they cannot go back. Okay, they cannot go back. So because they cannot go back, they cannot copy from their friends, because I may see question number 1 first, but my friend may see question number 2 first. Okay, when I submit my answer to question number 1, my friend submit his answer to question number 2, I cannot go back. Even if my friend share with me his answer for question 2, I cannot go back to my question. When I answer I suppose you know what I mean. That you know, when we have to answer different questions at the same time, and we are not able to go back to our previous answer, that is one way to actually stop them from copying. Okay, that's one way to help with the integrity of the responses. But the thing is that it does not help in terms, if you do item banking, that means you keep your questions for future semesters, then that maybe you can't do, because they can they can copy and paste. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. But if you need help, just you can contact me personally, inshallah, no problem. Okay. Shall I continue? Was there another question
in the chat? If I can read it out.
Okay.
Yeah. During the ERTL period, is it appropriate to remove the end of semester examination and inflate the weightage of the other examinations, like the quizzes or other tasks? They are already linked with the same CLO.
Okay, I think Dr. Zainuddin answered this question in the last session, right? That KCA is giving that flexibility. The thing is that what you can do is that you can add the questions that you intend to have in the final examination into your quizzes, or make it as part of your alternative assessment. Final assessment, you know, final exam is a final assessment. Final assessment is the last assessment that you are doing to measure students' ability or competency in the subject, whether they have achieved what you have taught them. Okay, so final assessment can take many different forms. One of the popular form is the final examination. So final examination is also a final assessment. An alternative assessment that you develop to replace your final examination is also a final assessment. Now, where this university is concerned, KCA has given the freedom to actually inflate, you know, but I think you need to be very careful about content coverage. You have to make sure that the content domain that you are evaluating actually well covered. Even if you inflate, not just to inflate the marks, but actually to make sure that whatever content domain that you are testing, that you plan to test in your final examination, are actually included in the other assessments that you are revising. Okay, can we continue?
Okay, all right, maybe, but there is one more question.
Okay.
Perhaps I think you want to answer this first. It
Okay.
talks about what's the best medium for role play speaking assessment, since we are not able to do a face-to-face.
Role play
Involves
speaking assessment. I think, you know, you can do an oral, you know, oral test can be but role play usually if it is one person, then it's no problem. But if it involves role play with, you know, other classmates, other teammates, then that's a bit difficult. But you can change the role play into a webinar session, right? Like this session, where you have different people to share certain things. So this also give them certain roles to play. One is the KKM DG, one is the university, few people are university VCs, and you know, so I think what is tested remain the same. What you want to see, the skills that you want to see should remain the same, but only adjust the task and the logistics of it, so that you can assess what you intend to assess. I hope I answered the question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so shall we move
continue on? Thank you. Okay, now issue of comparability of test tasks. Just now we mentioned about if you have 60 different questions, are they going to be comparable? If you look at these these hurdles, you see for every hurdler, the hurdle height is the same. You see, so the task difficulty is the same for in this horse whatever thing. You see, all obstacles are the same. So this would ensure fairness, and we need to make sure that our test tasks, if we use different test tasks, that they are comparable. Now, when we design, okay, fairness is one of those things. We talk about why assess, the purpose. We talk about, you know, content coverage. You have to do your TOS, table of specification. We talk about in test design, while things that you must consider. We've yet to talk about scoring rubrics. Fairness is very important. Okay. Can we give different tasks or assessment for our students who are using different learning modes or platforms? Now, so let's say you have a student who is not reachable by internet. He has to go by post. Are you going to give the same task or not? You know, so you cannot give an online task. Can you give an online task for everybody and give a different one to this person? How do you ensure that they are comparable? Okay? So if you look at these photos that I managed to get from the net, these are all bridges. Okay, but these bridges are not equally easy to cross. Okay, so some are easier and some are more difficult. So in the same way, differences in task difficulty is something which is real and we cannot ignore. Now this is an example, it's a very extreme example. One is only about annual homicides. One is about rate, birth rate, death rate, natural increase rate, and so on. So sometimes if you're not careful, we tend to make one question tougher than another question. Okay, and we think that they're comparable. So we really have to be very careful. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in modern test theory, there are ways to adjust for the differences in difficulty level of parallel tests so that they are comparable. But it requires certain things to be in place, okay, and certain analysis to take place. It's not that difficult to learn. I am teaching one course this semester. One of the things that the students have to do is just to do this thing, okay? But the easier way to maintain fairness is that for you to identify the most disadvantaged student that you have, you provide the same material or access for the completion of the task. Okay, the same materials or access for completion of the task. You give the same reading materials, you give the same reference materials. So all they have to do is that come up with a unique answer based on these materials. Okay, they cannot access any other materials. Use the same task, the same rubrics. As I said, scope for unique responses, give the same time frame. Okay, so what you can do is that you can have, it has been recommended, I'm not sure which university, to have an integrity statement that they will not, they will not cheat, they will not, So those things to have be in place so that it can help to guide them to do the right thing. Okay, whether it will actually, that's a different thing, right? So if you have any doubts that you should, we all know our students, right? I mean, if they are not such a big number in the class, so we know that based on our previous interaction with them, what they're capable of. If they give an answer that is something that is really beyond their maturity level or their ability level, you can follow up with a small viva voce, kind of like, in dentistry and medicine, I think also, for those borderline cases, if they get just 50%, they have to have a viva, some questions where they have to answer orally, or for distinction viva also. So you can follow up with this. You tell them that if I doubt your responses, I don't think that, I'm going to do this. So that would actually deter them to do things which are not right. So if you can maintain all these things, so the only difference in their performance, in their test scores, would actually be their ability, that's it, not because of the differences in the task. So this is how we maintain comparability. So fairness, no one should have advantage over others due to having additional access to resources, being financially able, or being able to use certain online platforms. So if your students, you have students you want to assess through an online platform, you need to make sure that you already teach them how to use those platforms. Not that they are scrambling for where's the function key for this and for this and for that, okay? All right, so link between alternative assessment and instruction. So as I mentioned earlier, alternative assessment is normally integrated with instruction. Okay, so this is like a project or problem-based learning. So you tell them what is expected, you give them the task, and then there is some assessment or feedback. And then you see there's a loop, assessment and teaching, assessment, feedback, and teaching, and so on. So if you are doing alternative assessment, do go for this kind of task, okay, where you actually help them along to do it, because all this while they may not have been exposed to it, and if you ask them to do an alternative assessment without much support, that is gonna be very difficult for the students. Okay, this is another example. Prof. Dr. Aliani from UPM. You see, she has assessment checkpoints. Okay, in her usual, the conventional assessment, in her face-to-face, she has one presentation, one rubric, and then a report, and a second rubric to assess the report. Okay, but because of the remote teaching and learning, to provide greater support for the students, So assessment, the different types of assessment has been introduced. Therefore, different types of rubrics have also been developed to actually address all these different types of assessment. Now, can you do this in a normal conventional face-to-face classroom? Of course you can. Okay, you can do this. The thing is that with our normal conventional assessment is that students have opportunity to come and see us and check with us whether they are doing their the processes are correct, whether the product that developing are in the right direction, you know. But with the ERTL, that cannot be done. So you have to break down your assessment into smaller pieces so that they get the support that they need, and also for you to be able to give them the the feedback that they require to move to the next part of the assessment or the teaching and learning. So this is an example for, let's say, Tilawah, you know. So what I have been involved with Mr. Abdullah have asked me to, to look at their Tilawah examination, their assessment. And I think for ERTL, what they can do is that they can, identify certain tajweed rules and ask the students to identify these rules in pre-assigned surah and prepare an oral presentation. So the act of actually this self-learning, looking for things and to put together, give a presentation, that would actually give them time to actually develop and understand what they're learning, and also to have better retention, okay, rather than memorizing and then coming for the examination and forget all about it. Okay. It's top 2, Prof.
Yes, there are a few questions in the chat, but perhaps I'll leave it to those who want to ask first here.
Okay. Any questions?
Any question from anyone? Otherwise, I will read it from the chat. Is that okay, Prof. Noli? All right.
Yes.
Regarding fairness, you mentioned about us using the same tasks, rubrics, and time frame. So, question number 1, can we give the same type of task with the same rubric but with different questions? Question number 2, if we follow the same time frame with less advantageous students, so how flexible are we to accommodate their situation?
Okay, all right. So the first question, you have you are testing the same skill, the same content domain, but different scenarios, for example. That's okay, no problem, because you don't want them to compare notes. All right. So that's okay. It's just that you need to make sure that the level of difficulty is as close as possible. This one that's why the vetting, the vetting is good, because we may not realize it, but our colleagues may spot some things which are not comparable between tasks. And the second question, Prof, just now, what is it?
If we follow the same time frame.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes, I remember now. The same time frame. For me, if you have students whom you cannot get online, you cannot use an online platform for assessment. You have to go for the non-online. Go for the most disadvantaged. Come up with an assessment task or method that would be suitable, that people who have access to online can use, and people with access to online also can use. Okay, that would make assessment a lot fairer. Okay.
Okay, any other question? Or I shall read another question from the chat.
Okay.
Much earlier, you said about giving one question to one set of students, different set of students. So if the questions are given to one, the questions are given one by one as a single attempt, doesn't that take away the students' privilege to check and edit their own work before they submit?
Actually, you know, that you should give them ample time to actually do all those things. You know, you should give them ample time. That is not speeded test like you give them a very short time and they have to quickly read and then, you know, submit. You give them adequate time to actually go through the questions and then proceed. There are some, I think, I'm not sure about GRE now, but GRE in the past used to be like that. You know, the if you want to do postgraduate study in the US, you have to sit for this test, which is similar to the SAT. So you can't go back. Okay, you can only move forward, you can't go back. So these are the strategies that we can use for online testing to ensure that students don't copy or don't cheat. Your next alternative would be to have different sets of questions. Then that's the difficulty of making them comparable, you know, ensuring that they are the same difficulty level. And then you can also have, instead of this kind of questions, let's say essay questions or multiple choice questions, you can have questions where you get them to have unique answers. So you have quite a bit of alternative, quite a bit of different types of tasks or assessment formats or methods that you can choose from. Choose one that is best suited to your needs and the ones that you think would actually evaluate the student's ability in the fairest, most reliable and most valid way. This is what I think.
Okay.
All right.
I have a question.
Okay.
Well, I would like to have your opinion on possibility of doing this. Now, let's say in the old normal semester, I have LO1, CLO1, CLO2, and CLO3 in the final examination. And you mentioned about being fair and making sure that our assessment tasks are valid. But let's say for this new normal semester, I will scrape the final examination for my will be testing CLO1, 2, and 3, but I distribute them in task 1, task 2, task 3 that are already there in the camp, which are the final assessment, become the final assessment. Okay. However, as we know, final examination is individual effort.
Yeah.
50% comes from individual efforts demonstrating ability in the learning outcome, the target learning outcome. So, if the task 1 and 2 and 3 are group work, so will that be valid and fair, or is that acceptable?
I agree with you, Prof. This actually the final, many people are unhappy to do away with the final examination, because that final examination actually, is a very good tool for us to differentiate the A from the B's and from the C's and from, and most final exam questions, because they are vetted and they, some questions are actually from the item bank. We know how those questions function. We know how well they work, and we know that they are able to make this differentiation between different levels of students' ability. Now, if you want to scrape the final examination, you can, I think, you can put in one task, I suppose, but maybe part of the task is individual, but part of the task is a group. Because I've done it before, where I tell my students, this part of it is a group effort. You have to work together to come up with this. But there are some individual, some components which you will be individually assessed. So this would, so no freeloaders, So I think that individual component that you set in the task would actually help you to make that fine distinctions between the different levels of ability of the students. What do you think? What's your suggestion?
I was just discussing with the kuliah, and I was thinking that, for every course that has a final examination of 40%, whatever that you do, you must have one assessment task that is individual, whether you combine it. Because I was thinking of what you said about validity just now and fairness.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. Must be discussed and must be fine. I think standardization is also very important, right? You don't want anything to be, now ERTL is, is tough, and then if it's chaotic, then it will become worse. So some form of monitoring and standardization, I think, is very important. Thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you.
Prof. Okay. So shall I continue with the constructive alignment?
Can I ask one more question, Prof?
Yes, please, Atamira. But I'm running out of time. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Prof. I hope everybody doesn't mind. Inshallah. Yeah. So I just want to ask about the shuffling, the question that you mentioned earlier. I remembered every time we vet for questions, we just have to make sure that the question will start from the easiest to the most difficult.
Yeah.
With shuffle, we cannot ensure that, right, Prof?
True. A very, 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 very valid point. You cannot do that. The reason why we always start with the easy one is so that, we get this warm-up thing for the students. They don't get discouraged. They become motivated, But with this shuffling is going to be tough. How Dr. Mira, do you have any suggestion about how for them not to copy and don't shuffle the questions? I'm not very good.
There is options to shuffle the option rather than the question. So that's one way. But again, there's still no guarantee students would not will not cheat
share the answers.
They can just pick the right answer and then they share. It's a bit difficult, but the point that you mentioned earlier, Prof, about integrity declaration, that happens now almost in all university. I think we should also enforce that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think we need more discussion and how to actually handle the online assessment.
True. Yes. Thank you, Prof. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so constructive alignment, this is an example about how I did for my, how to arrive at the task. Say, for example, one of your LO is you want to do it for the final exam. How do you actually translate it to an alternative assessment? So this is, we must make sure that our assessment is matched to our learning outcomes. Okay, must have constructive alignment. So these are the domains that are commonly tested. If you look at your course outline, you'd have the cognitive aspect. Sometimes you have psychomotor or affective, but normally you have some elements of soft skills. So this is an example that I have. I co-teach this course with Prof. Ainul. One semester she teaches, one semester I teach. Language testing and evaluation for masters. So these are the this is the LO, all right, for them to explain fundamental concepts, principles, and purposes of language testing, as well as the utility of traditional and alternative assessment methods in assessing language ability. So these are the domains that I have identified. Okay, so for cognitive is at C2 to explain, affective is A3 valuing, psychomotor is P2 explain or show, and the soft skills are communication skill, and critical thinking. So what I do is that I go to this wheel. Okay, so I look at, so C2 is, this is C2, explain is C2, so it's correct. And then affective domain is A3, and then psychomotor, they have to explain. That means they must do something to explain. Either they write or they have to perform this task. Okay. So I look at this one, communication skill. It says that they must present clearly with confidence and appropriate to the level of the listener. So it must be an oral presentation. Okay? And they must demonstrate that they have critical thinking and problem solving skills. So in the end, based on this LO, and based on all these domains that I have written in my course outline, so I have to then, for me, it should be an oral presentation. And my scoring rubrics should actually look at the cognitive aspect, which is the explanation of the fundamental concepts. And psychomotor would be, the act of explaining. And the soft skill one, the communication skill, presentation, and must demonstrate critical thinking. So then I have to think about the time allocation, whether it's individual or group. Okay, like Prof. Ainul mentioned just now, we have to be aware about if we have too much, we have already two or three group work, then we should focus on individual. Okay? So in coming up with the rubrics, then we have to make sure that we cover all these things. So I make sure that all these domains are covered and at the level that they should be covered. Okay, I think let's stop this one, because we are running out of time and got lots of questions just now. Now, how to make scoring rubrics more reliable? One of the things that I mentioned during Prof. Ainul's session is that my scoring rubrics tend to be quite short. Okay, like this one, for example, only four different or three different levels of performances. Yeah, like from 1 to 5, and coming up with the descriptors for each criteria and at each level of performance is not easy. If you were to stretch it to 1 to 10, it would be more difficult, okay? Because those criteria, those descriptors must be clearly distinct from at the different levels of performance, okay? So this is another example. So, this is another example, but the problem is that you tend to sort of clump everybody, most people in either this category or that category. Sometimes what we do is that we become a bit naughty. We say, okay, 4.5 or 3.5, to have greater distinctions to differentiate the different levels of performances that the students are displaying. So this is another example. So in this example, this is a weighted rubric where you have 4 different scale points, but you assign weight to different aspects or to different criteria. Now, my suggestion is that, I really like this part where they have this individual thing. Okay? So my suggestion is to actually give marks for each of these individual elements, because sometimes one student assignment cannot fit in 4 for all elements. Sometimes they do 4 for number 1 and number 2, but they only, their assignment only fit you can only give 3 points for other elements or even less. So my suggestion is actually to make the scoring rubric more reliable is actually to assign marks for each of the points that you have within a criteria. So in this example, okay, let's say for one student assigns a clearly defined role, okay, but does not consider all views. So usually, not always, okay, and does almost as much. So this one, it does not do a full share, okay, does not do equal share, but fall in this category. So my suggestion is to actually have scores for different elements in one criteria. Okay, so instead of giving the student, let's say the student did a very good work, but have some limitations in the assignment, instead of thinking which category I should give and award the one that you think would best suit that level of performance, it's better to differentiate it like this so that you know, the students, the accuracy in the awarding of marks is higher. Okay. Now, for example, this is something that I usually see when people work with cell culture. Okay, because sometimes I help them with statistical analysis. So sometimes what they do is that they count the number of cells. But sometimes instead of counting the number of cells, they do intensity from 0% to 25%, from above 25 to 50, and above 50 to 75, and then above that. So when you do a statistical analysis, you are not able to see differences between one biomarker and another biomarker, because you're not able to making that fine distinctions, fine differentiation. Okay, so if you do it like this, what will happen is that you are able to stretch out that ruler, and you are able to differentiate between different levels of performances. And when you are able to do that, you are then able to finely distinguish students at different grade levels. Okay, you will have greater confidence to do that. Your precision, your measurement, your assessment will be more precise, and you will have less misclassification problems, and you would attain higher reliability and validity of your assessment. Okay, so what is important for us is that whenever we use scoring rubrics, is for us to be internally consistent, you know, intra-rater consistency, that we are able to identify the good points and the weak points of the assignments that the students have, the product that the students have produced, and give consistent evaluation. So this is very important. Okay, now the other thing is that if you are teaching one section and you're co-teaching with two other people, for example, how do you ensure this same way of looking at examining the students' work? So this is a question of inter-rater consistency. So there must be sit-in discussion, and then some mechanism that must be put in place so that your evaluation and your colleagues' evaluation would actually be similar. Okay. All right. So I'm just sharing. This is my second last slide, I think, about exam.net. This one is a Swedish group. They're giving it free for 2020, but I'm not sure about test security, because everything will be stored in their databases or their system. So whether if you use this, whether later you can retrieve your questions, I'm not sure. Okay. Finally, formative assessment. You can use any online platform for formative assessment because it's meant for feedback. Okay. But for summative assessment, like Dr. Mira mentioned just now, many institutions are having these integrity statements to make sure that people don't cheat. Okay, so to summarize, the main point of my presentation is that the task that you select must fit the purpose of your assessment. It must be able to assess what you want to assess. It doesn't matter whether it is considered as traditional or is considered as alternative. So what is the target of your assessment? So you have to select the right kind of task so that you can assess the skills that you want to assess or the knowledge that you want to assess. So that is all. So any questions?
Any questions?
I will leave my slides. Yes.
Anyone? There's one question in the chat, if I can read it. Who makes a final call in this ERTL period about whether to do without the final examination or whether we can go for alternative assessment? Is it the individual course instructor, the department, or the kuliah? And then the other one is from the same person, Dr. Azrin. We have the issue of the accreditation board. Some programs have the accreditation body. So hard with all these changes. What's the take on standardization, reliability, and fairness?
Actually, let me answer this second question first. For professional bodies, like let's say, for example, for dentistry, they have a professional exam at the end of year 5. Okay, it's going to happen in June or July or something like that. Now that one, they cannot miss. They have to have it, because if the students don't go for that examination, then they cannot practice. So it's the same with counseling, I think, right? Counseling says that they must have 42-hour face-to-face, and their counseling sessions must be face-to-face. So who determines? It would be the accreditation body. It would also be in conjunction with the kuliah, because you need to think about the logistics, how to arrange for a final examination with physical distancing. And then also the lecturer point of view is also very important, because you know your course, you know what should be assessed, you know the skills that the student should possess. Okay, so it has to be done together. So this is why I think, like in co-ed, our Prof Dean here has asked us, what are your plans? And this has to be discussed. It's not a one-man show, because number one, it's not an easy time for all of us. Everybody needs support. We may miss a few things. So when we do it collaboratively in Shura, then, inshallah, the outcome will be good. Have I answered the question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
There's one comment by Prof. Ida that group work in this MCO period is indeed difficult. So I think that relates to what you said about being practical as well. So perhaps, and also what we assess in the rubrics. So perhaps it is something to consider on giving group work as a task, Prof.
I think if your students do have some limitations to have discussions, then maybe that task needs to be changed. So, or the mode of the discussion has to change. Your creativity, how you are going to do it, because there's some group work. I notice some students, I always school my students for this. I said that what happens is that we give them group work for them to work together. But what they do is that they cut it into small chunks, small pieces, and they distribute it. And sometimes even in the presentation, you see different background, different, and they don't actually come together and work together. So the point of that group work is actually missed, right? So I think if some students are not accessible, then we need to change about that nature of the group work. I think this is a good time to explore many things. Like I explore how to do videos, and it's.
So in other words, it's good that you say that, Prof. So in other words, while we are so focused on what we should do with our final examinations, we should also revisit the current course assessments that we are doing that probably are no longer viable or fair on the students simply because of the situation that we all have to go through. Everything has to be online, and then the restriction is MCO.
Yeah, nicely put. Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Yeah, Prof. Nodida. I'm Ian here from Pharmacy.
How are you?
Yeah, Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay, so I just would like to ask, when you mentioned just now regarding the modern test theory, where you can actually link different questions, but all the questions are actually related to each other, and then you can have a single test. So this is actually very, very interesting for us to actually learn further. Yeah, they have any other sessions on that, so we can
I sometimes run courses for it last time because it's very specialized, you know. So some people have attended the courses. I don't think anyone from QOP, but I will try to see how I can show you how to do it, because it's not that difficult, you know, but it has to be like a specialized session.
Yeah, that would be excellent. Yes, yeah, I would like.
Inshallah, we'll try and see how it can be done. Inshallah.
Yeah, thank you. Inshallah.
Yes, inshallah.
Can you take one more question, Prof?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think this one is quite important. Due to the lack of the good internet connection, what if we have role play through WhatsApp voice? WhatsApp voice. So would that be fair? Would that be good? Would that be okay?
Okay, but you have to change the construct that you want to see, you know, so it must be based on just the voice. So in terms of presentation, because when you talk about presentation, you're talking about eye contact, you're talking about reading from notes, you know. So these are some of the elements that we normally put in our scoring rubrics, that they maintain good eye contact, they don't read from notes. So those sort of things you cannot measure, because now you cannot check, you cannot see. So those things you cannot assess. So the assessment, the rubrics has to change, because the elements now have changed somewhat.
Okay. All right, good. So thank you. So the other pointer is like you have pointed, Prof. So perhaps this is also a time that you have to make sure that your rubrics is still relevant considering all the limitations that you are facing.
Yes, true.
Yeah,
true. Okay. Many adjustments actually, you know, Prof. That's why it's a very difficult time for lecturers. Many things to look at, many things to change, especially with alternative assessment. It must be integrated with our teaching and learning. So you know, this 1 month, we were supposed to start in June, right? 1st June. The first 1 week or the first 2 weeks is like a trial run. It's like, you know, this time that we have now is for us to adjust our teaching and learning, to adjust the assessments, so that, you know, we'll be okay. Our students will be okay. But and us here, Dr. Mira, me, and I think our colleagues in co-ed, and also our colleagues in other kuliah, our educator 4.0 team, we're all here to try and provide support for, you know, anyone who needs it. Yeah.
Okay. And Dr. Mira, any more question in the YouTube?
Yeah, but I think it's quite similar to the question earlier from engineering. There's one question from IRKHS. For classes with large number of students, more than 100, such as MPU classes, which test is more relevant and reliable?
For me, you know, those UniCore courses, those university required courses, I think personally, you don't need grades for that. You can have a pass and fail kind of thing, you know. So you don't need high precision for that, for the measurement of categorizing them into low, into pass or fail. But I think you can give them some sort of written assignment or something like that. Make sure it's not too long that it would exhaust you to read and grade, and also something that you can subject to turn it in, you know, to catch for to make sure that there's no plagiarism. So I think for certain courses, you know, let's say Bahasa Melayu for communication, I think it is okay, because the credit maybe it's not 3 credit, right? And also it is let's say for foreign students, right? They have this Bahasa Melayu for communication. So something which doesn't doesn't really require grade A, B, C, D and all that. My main concern is the final year students. The final year students, the grades are important because this is their final year, and for some students, this is the semester that they want to make a difference in their CGPA. They want to raise their CGPA to get them a better chance, to give them a better chance to secure a job, for example. You know, so this kind of examination, if it has to be conducted properly, you must do the assessment properly so that you know, everything goes well. But courses that you know, like first level courses and all that, those can be pass fail. But as Prof. Ainul mentioned, this has to be discussed at the kuliah level and maybe get advice from KCA.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any
Prof.
other question?
No, that's the only question from YouTube viewer. So I think, yeah, we have all of the question answered, Prof.
Yep. We can wrap up, inshallah.
Assalamualaikum. I think we have still have one question from Dr. Muhammad Hassan Al Naim in the chat room. Okay, what was it? Okay, if I have 5 students out of 50 that may have problem to go for synchronous online assessment, can we proceed with the synchronous online assessment with all and be more flexible with the submission time frame for only those 5 students?
This is the assignment, kan? Not test, right? Not quiz.
This is online assessment. Online
is
assessment,
it quiz? Is it
quiz? Dr. Hassan, are you there?
For me, you know, if the number of students are not many, you can always go for oral exam. You know, you can always go for an oral exam. You can make a phone call and ask. You can get them to submit those questions, and then you check. You know, you check whether they actually know it or whether they shared answers or got help from anyone. So it's good to follow up with a checking mechanism. You know, just a check and balance kind of thing.
Oh,
just make sure. Yes, because there are not many, right? There are about 3 or 4 or 5 students. You know, so you can. It's like a borderline pass viva or a distinction viva. You know, so you can do that. I think you feel better when you want to give them marks.
To engage with them directly.
Yes. So that you know that they actually know, because we don't want to give them marks that they don't deserve, and we do not want to take away marks that they deserve to get. So if we have that check and balance mechanism, that would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
I tend to agree on that, Prof, when you say that they deserve the marks that they deserve, but at the same time, we don't want, like for example, you have 5 students in the class, 3 or 4 of them have the same marks, but in fact they are not the same in terms of their performance. So perhaps 10% of an oral examination or 10 to 20% of oral examination can discriminate these 3 people or distinguish these 3 people that they are different.
Yeah. So if you have even if you have, you know, doubts about whether to give students an A or fail, you can, you know, have this oral test. It helps.
Okay.
All right.
Prof, I know. I think that's one last request from the Zoom viewer. There's one question from Dr. Rahim. Prof, can you recommend some of your favorite references that we can refer to for proper framing of the elements and to understand ways to assess those elements efficiently? So maybe Dr. Rahim can start with Prof slides and then additional references, Prof.
Additional references. The trouble is that the net is the good place to go, but it has anyone can put anything up there. I don't know. most of the things that I take from language testing, because Prof. Ainul and I are engaged in language testing. So language testing actually has a very good source of references. Like I've used Buckman and Palmer, Fulcher, but what I'll do is that, inshallah, I shall put the list of texts that can be referred to, so that can refer to that. But actually, for my slides, I took a combination of from different things, and based on my own personal experience, I have put them together.
Yeah, that's what makes it the first point of reference, recommended reference.
Recommended, yes. I will put them. Yes, inshallah.
All right, thank you, Prof.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Prof. So,
thank you. So I think, Alhamdulillah, thank you so much for spending time to be with me, and it's not that bad after all.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Prof. Noli. I think we've got a lot of questions being answered in this session, and I'm sure down into doing it, there'll be a lot more questions. So I think on behalf of CPD and the team, we would like to thank you for your effort. Inshallah, I think we are open, even at the Kuliah of Education, we are open if you think that you need individual or departmental help in making sure that we are doing this the right way. So with that, again, thank you, Prof. Noli. Thank you, everyone. So inshallah, let's do it together. So let's end this session with Suratul Ans and Tasbih Kifarah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Ainul. Thank you, Dr. Mira.
Thank you, Prof. Ainul. Thank you, Prof. Noli.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Okay, waalaikumsalam. Thank you, Prof. Nolida.
Thank you.
Thank you.